My aunt walked up to my son during his school band recital, took his instrument case out of his hands, and told him he wasn't allowed to play anymore. She said there had been a mix-up with the money and that the rental wasn't meant for him. His teacher froze. The other kids stared. Caleb just looked at me and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" By the next morning, the school district was investigating fraud. Okay, quick context. This happened in a way that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it, because it wasn't just rude, it was targeted. It was done in front of my kid, in front of his teacher, in front of a room full of parents who didn't know our family history and didn't need to. Caleb was 11, in 6th grade, and he'd been practicing the clarinet like it was his job, not in a prodigy way, in an earnest way. The kind of kid who lines up his sheet music on the coffee table, taps his pencil against the measures he keeps missing, and asks me to listen even when I'm exhausted. I'm a union electrician. My days start early and end with my shoulders aching, but I'd sit there anyway on our beat-up couch, nodding like I understood the difference between good and almost good. He didn't care if I was an expert. He cared that I was there. The winter recital was on a Thursday night at his middle school in Dayton, Ohio. The building smelled like floor wax and old cafeteria pizza. The auditorium was the same kind of room every public school has. Hard seats, bright stage lights, and a microphone that always squeals at least once. Parents brought flowers like their kids were performing at Carnegie Hall. Some brought camcorders and stood in the aisle like they were filming a documentary. I brought my phone at 30% and a travel mug of coffee because I'd come straight from a job site. Caleb wore his white button-down shirt and black pants, the ones I'd ironed badly but with my whole heart. His hair was still damp at the collar because he'd rushed through a shower, then spent 10 minutes fussing with the strap on his clarinet case like it needed to sit exactly right on his shoulder. He kept adjusting it even after we were parked. It wasn't nerves, exactly. It was that pre-performance focus where kids want everything to feel in control because the big thing ahead of them doesn't. I remember noticing my Aunt Denise as soon as she walked into the auditorium. She's not my mother. She's my dad's sister, the one who always acted like she was doing us a favor by being in our lives. Denise is the kind of woman who volunteers for committees because she likes access, not because she likes helping. She dresses like she's always on her way to a fundraiser. She speaks in that tone that implies she knows better than you and is trying not to say it out loud. She raised my cousin Ryan after his dad took off. She's been loud about everything she did for him, like it was a heroic solo act and not just parenting. Ryan is 19 now, going to community college off and on, floating through jobs, always between plans. Denise has never said he's struggling. She calls it finding his path. When I struggled, she called it bad choices. End quote. Denise waved at me from 2 rows back like we were close. I nodded, polite, because that's the habit I was raised with. My dad would always say, "She means well." He said that about Denise the same way people say, "It's just rain," while you're standing in a storm. Caleb was already up on stage with the beginner band, sitting in the 2nd row, clarinet across his lap, posture stiff the way kids sit when they've been told to sit up straight. He glanced out at the audience until he found me, then gave me a little half-smile like he needed to confirm I really showed up. I lifted my hand and gave him a small wave, nothing dramatic. He turned back forward, but I saw his shoulders relax a fraction. The band director did the usual speech. Thanks to families, thanks to the boosters. Music builds character. A couple of parents clapped too hard at the wrong parts. Then the kids started their first song. It wasn't perfect. There were squeaks and late entrances and one kid in the back who looked like he was counting silently with his mouth. But Caleb was playing. I could see his fingers moving in time, and his face had that serious concentration that made him look older than 11. Halfway through the 2nd song, I noticed movement in the aisle. Denise stood up. At first I thought she was going to the bathroom. Then I thought maybe she was stepping out to take a phone call. But she didn't angle toward the exit. She walked straight down the center aisle like she had business on the stage. She wasn't rushing, either. She moved with purpose, like she expected people to get out of her way. A couple of parents leaned back to let her pass. The band director kept conducting, eyes on the kids, not on the audience, because he had no reason to think a grown woman was about to do something insane. Denise reached the steps at the side of the stage and climbed up like she belonged there. That's when my heart did that little drop it does when something is wrong and you don't know how wrong yet. She walked behind the first row of kids, careful not to trip over music stands, smiling like she was trying to look helpful. Some of the kids glanced at her and then back at their sheet music, confused but obedient. Caleb noticed her when she was 2 feet away. His eyes widened just slightly, like he was trying to understand why my aunt was on stage during the performance. Denise leaned down to him and said something I couldn't hear. Her mouth was tight, not kind. Caleb's hands froze on the clarinet. Then she reached for his instrument case, which was tucked under his chair, and pulled it out. Caleb stood up halfway without meaning to, as if his body was trying to protect his things before his brain caught up. Denise took the clarinet from his lap with one hand and the case with the other. The sound stopped. Not immediately, not like someone cut the power, but the way a room changes when confusion ripples through it. A few kids kept playing for 2 more beats. Then they stopped too. The band director's arms lowered slowly, and he turned his head, face blank with disbelief. Denise spoke in a voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "There's been a mix-up with the money. This rental isn't supposed to be in his name." I could feel people staring at Caleb, not at her. That's the part that made me want to stand up and flip the whole auditorium over. Adults can be cruel, but crowds are worse. A crowd makes everything feel official. Caleb's face went white. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just looked out into the audience until he found me again, and his eyes were shiny like he was holding everything in with both hands. He said quietly, but I could see his lips move, "Did I do something wrong?" I stood up. I didn't do it dramatically. I didn't shout. I just got to my feet, because sitting suddenly felt like agreeing. My chair creaked loud in the silence, and a few parents turned to look at me like I was about to become the problem. Denise held Caleb's clarinet like it was a borrowed umbrella. Her face had that calm certainty she always wore when she decided she was right. She looked down at him and said something else, still not yelling, still controlled, like she was explaining a policy. The band director stepped toward her, palms out, and spoke to her low. The kids on stage were staring everywhere except at Caleb because they didn't know where to put their eyes. Caleb stood there empty-handed, in his white shirt, under the stage lights, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him look. I walked down the aisle fast but steady. My boots thudded on the floor. I didn't care if I looked angry. I was angry. I just wasn't going to hand Denise the satisfaction of watching me explode. When I got to the front row, Denise finally looked at me, eyebrows raised like she was waiting for me to understand, like she was doing me a favor. All I could think was, she didn't come to watch him. She came to take something from him, and she chose the one place where he couldn't hide. That was the moment I stopped believing this was about a mix-up. It was about control. It always was. And I didn't know it yet. But by the next morning, the school district was going to tell me the word they use when someone manipulates restricted funds and falsifies authorization. Fraud. The recital didn't continue. Not really. The band director ushered the kids off stage in that calm, practiced way adults use when something goes wrong in front of children and they don't want it to turn into a memory that sticks too sharply. Parents clapped anyway, too loud, too late, like applause could smooth over confusion. Denise walked off the stage with Caleb's clarinet tucked under her arm, not rushed, not apologetic. She didn't look back at him. I didn't yell at her. I didn't grab anything out of her hands. I stayed focused on Caleb, who stood frozen until his teacher gently touched his shoulder and guided him toward the side door with the rest of the band. Only then did he start moving, head down, hands clenched at his sides like he was trying not to shake. I followed him out into the hallway, past trophy cases and faded posters about attendance and kindness. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was quiet in that specific way school hallways are quiet at night, like the building itself is listening. Caleb stopped near the lockers and leaned his forehead against the metal. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. That landed harder than anything Denise had done. "You didn't do anything," I said immediately. I put my hand on his back, solid, grounding. "Nothing. This isn't on you." He nodded like he heard me, but I could tell he didn't believe it yet. Kids are good at that, hearing reassurance without absorbing it. He asked, "Am I in trouble with the school?" "No," I said, "and if anyone is, it's not you." The band director came out a minute later, looking exhausted and uncomfortable. He apologized 3 times in different ways, like rotating through scripts. He said he'd never seen anything like that. He said the rental paperwork had been handled before the semester started. He said he didn't know why a family member would interfere during a performance. I told him it wasn't his fault. I meant it. Institutions aren't built to handle relatives who weaponize access. We left early. I signed Caleb out because technically he hadn't performed, which felt ridiculous and cruel, and I didn't want him sitting in the auditorium pretending everything was fine. We walked to the car in silence. The cold air hit our faces, sharp and real. Caleb buckled in slowly, staring straight ahead. Halfway home, he asked, "Am I still in band?" "Yes," I said. "You're still in band. Without a clarinet?" "We'll handle it," I said. "I promise." He nodded again. This time, the nod was smaller. When we got home, I made grilled cheese because it was the only thing I had energy for. Caleb ate quietly, then went to his room without being told. I could hear him moving things around, opening drawers that didn't need opening, looking for something to fix when nothing was broken on his end. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my phone. Denise hadn't texted. She hadn't called. She didn't send a message explaining anything or pretending she was misunderstood. That silence told me more than any excuse would have. I checked my email and saw a message from the school district sent an hour earlier, time-stamped during the recital. The subject line was neutral, almost polite. Account update notification. I opened it. It said that changes had been made to a student-associated music program funding account and that if I did not authorize these changes, I should contact the district office. I felt that same cold calm settle into my chest. The account wasn't something I thought about often. At the start of the year, I'd filled out paperwork for subsidized instrument rental because the school offered assistance for families who qualified or who opted into pooled funding. Denise had insisted on handling it. She'd said she had experience with these things and that it would be easier if she used the family education trust she managed. She framed it like a favor, like she always did. I'd hesitated, but she'd brushed it off with a smile and said, "I'll take care of it." 80 said. I remembered that now, sitting at my table, the smell of burned cheese still in the air. I called the number in the email. It rang 3 times before someone answered. I gave my name, Caleb's name, explained that my son's instrument had been taken during a recital and that I'd just received a notification about his account. There was a pause. Not a dramatic one, a professional one. The woman on the line asked me to verify my identity. Then she asked if I'd authorized a reassignment of benefits earlier that week. "No," I said. Another pause, longer this time. She told me she'd need to transfer me to the district finance office. I was on hold for 7 minutes listening to a looped instrumental version of something cheerful and generic. My foot tapped against the floor. I didn't feel panicked. I felt alert. The finance officer was careful with her words. She said the account tied to Caleb's music program had been accessed by an authorized adult. She said the authorization wasn't forged. She said the changes had been flagged because they redirected benefits away from the named student. Redirected to who? I asked. She didn't answer that right away. She asked if I was in a place where I could talk privately. I said yes, even though Caleb's room was 10 feet away and I didn't want him hearing any of this. She told me the account benefits had been reassigned to another student under the same trust umbrella, my cousin Ryan. The room felt very quiet after that, not empty. Focused. I thanked her. I asked what the next steps were. She told me the district would initiate an internal review and that the trust administrator would be contacted. She said they took misuse of restricted educational funds seriously. After I hung up, I didn't call Denise. I didn't call my dad. I didn't call anyone who might try to talk me out of being upset or explain how Denise meant well. I went into Caleb's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He was lying on his stomach, staring at his phone without scrolling. His clarinet stand was empty in the corner, looking ridiculous without the instrument it was meant to hold. "They're fixing it," I said. "The school. You didn't lose band." He turned his head toward me. "Is Aunt Denise mad at me?" "No," I said. "She's not mad at you. It's very save accesstation." "Then why did she take it?" I thought about my answer carefully. I didn't want to lie. I also didn't want to hand my 11-year-old the full weight of adult selfishness. "Sometimes," I said, "grown-ups make decisions that aren't about kids at all, even when kids are the ones who get hurt." He frowned. "That's dumb." I smiled a little. "Yeah," I said. "It is." He rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling. "I liked playing," he said quietly. "I was getting better." "I get again." "You still are," I said. "This doesn't erase that." That night, after he fell asleep, I pulled out the folder Denise had given me months earlier, the one with the trust paperwork. I hadn't read it closely then. I had trusted that handled meant handled correctly. Now I read every page. That's when I saw the clause she'd counted on me not noticing. A line about trustee conduct, about removal in the event of misuse or redirection of funds outside their stated purpose. I didn't feel satisfaction when I found it. I felt something steadier. Denise had done what she always did. She'd assumed I wouldn't push back. She'd assumed I'd be embarrassed, confused, eager to smooth things over. She'd assumed I'd prioritize family peace over my kid. She'd chosen a public moment to remind Caleb of his place. She'd miscalculated who I was willing to be when my child was involved. The next morning, before work, I forwarded the district email to my personal account. I printed the trust documents. I made copies. I put everything into a folder and labeled it clearly. Then I dropped Caleb off at school, walked him to the door, and watched him go inside without his clarinet case. He looked back once. I nodded. "Tonight," I said, "we start fixing it." And we did. The school day passed slower than usual. I wired a panel at a commercial site, checked off inspections, answered questions from an apprentice who was still learning which breaker controlled what. My hands knew what to do. My mind kept drifting back to the stage lights, the empty music stand, the way Denise's voice had sounded calm and certain while she took something that didn't belong to her. On my lunch break, I sat in my truck and called the number the district finance officer had given me. This time, the call was returned by someone higher up. He introduced himself as part of compliance. He didn't ask how I felt about what happened. He asked for facts, dates, names, authorization history. I appreciated that more than sympathy. He confirmed what I already suspected. Denise hadn't just moved money. She'd submitted a request to reassign ongoing program benefits from Caleb to Ryan under the same trust account. It was framed as an administrative correction. The only reason it was flagged was because the request didn't come from me. She wasn't supposed to be able to do that, I said. She wasn't, he agreed. But the trust documentation listed her as the acting trustee with discretionary authority. I thought of all the times she'd insisted on handling things for the family. The way she collected access, the way other people collect favors. "What happens now?" I asked. He told me the district would freeze the account pending review. He said they'd restore Caleb's eligibility immediately, using emergency funding, so he wouldn't miss instruction. He said their legal team would contact the trust's financial institution. He didn't say the word fraud, but it hovered between us. After the call, I sat there longer than I needed to. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. This was something colder, more deliberate. That evening, I stopped by a local music shop on my way home. It wasn't fancy. Just a narrow place tucked between a dry cleaner and a pizza joint. The owner was a guy in his 50s who smelled faintly of valve oil and coffee. I told him what happened. He didn't ask many questions. He pulled a used student clarinet off the wall, checked the pads, adjusted the cork, and quoted me a price that was lower than it should have been. "Kids shouldn't miss practice," he said. "That's how you lose them." Now it ground. When I got home, Caleb was sitting at the table doing homework, pencil tapping in that familiar rhythm. I set the case down gently in front of him. He looked up. His eyes widened. "For now," I said. "This one's yours to practice with." He didn't smile right away. He opened the case slowly, like he didn't trust it not to disappear. When he lifted the clarinet out, his shoulders loosened. Just a bit. "Really?" he asked. "Really." I weigh. He hugged me, quick and tight, like he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Then he went to his room and started playing, soft at first, then stronger. The notes weren't perfect, but they filled the house in a way that felt like things were snapping back into place. I didn't tell Denise about the clarinet. I didn't tell her about the district review. I let her sit in the silence she'd created. She didn't last long. 2 days later, she called me during my commute. Her name lit up my dashboard screen. I pulled over before answering, not because I was afraid of what she'd say, but because I wanted to hear it clearly. She didn't ask how Caleb was. She didn't apologize for the recital. She went straight to accusation. "Why is the school calling me?" she demanded. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," I said. Her voice sharpened. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed a child," I said. My tone stayed even. "In public." She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It was a paperwork issue." "It wasn't," I said. "You reassigned benefits without consent." She didn't deny it. She explained it. "Ryan needs stability," she said. "He's older. This matters more for him right now." "That money wasn't for him," I said. "It's family money," she snapped. "I decide how it's used." There it was. The sentence that had probably lived in her head for years. "No," I said. "You don't." She laughed, short and sharp. "You really think you can take this from me?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." She hung up on me. That night, I emailed the trust's financial institution. I attached copies of the district's notice, the trust clause I'd flagged, and a formal request for trustee review based on misuse of funds. I didn't write anything emotional. I didn't mention the recital. I kept it factual. Dates, actions, outcomes. The response came the next morning. They acknowledged receipt. They said they'd initiate an investigation. They said Denise would be notified. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't tell anyone who might warn her. I let the process move the way it was designed to move, slow and official. Caleb's band director emailed me that afternoon. Caleb would be allowed to participate fully while the funding issue was resolved. The director added a personal note at the bottom. He said Caleb had talent. He said he hoped this didn't discourage him. I read that line twice. That weekend, Denise showed up at my house. I hadn't told her where I lived. She must have gotten it from my dad. She stood on my porch with her arms crossed, expression tight, like she'd practiced it in the car. I didn't invite her in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You've gone too far," she said. I waited. "You could have talked to me," she said. "We're family." "You didn't talk to me," I said. "You acted." She pointed at the house. "You think you're protecting him, but you're teaching him to turn on family." I shook my head. "I'm teaching him that adults don't get to take things from kids just because they can." She stared at me like she was trying to recognize someone she'd underestimated. "I raised you better than this," she said. "You raised me to stay quiet," I said. "That's different." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me. Her confidence wavered just a fraction. "They're calling you too," I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. "I read the trust," I continued. "All of it." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine," she said finally. "That's not what the paperwork says," I replied. She left without another word. 3 weeks later, the trust notified all parties of the decision. Denise was removed as trustee pending further review. An interim administrator was appointed. All discretionary access was revoked. Caleb's funding was restored in full. Ryan lost access to benefits he'd never earned. Denise sent me a message after that. It was long and full of self-pity and blame. She said I'd ruined her reputation. She said the family would never forgive me. I didn't respond. The following month, Caleb stood on the same stage, clarinet in hand, and played his solo. I sat in the audience and watched him breathe, fingers steady, eyes focused forward. Denise wasn't there. The music filled the room anyway. And for the first time since that night, I felt sure of something. I hadn't overreacted. I had responded exactly enough. After Denise was removed as trustee, the noise died down fast. That surprised me more than anything. I'd spent years bracing for backlash every time I pushed back even a little, and now that I'd pushed all the way, the silence felt unreal. No angry voicemails. No family group texts blowing up my phone, just a sudden absence where her voice used to be. It didn't last. My dad called a week later. He didn't start with hello. He started with a sigh, the long kind, like he was already tired of a conversation that hadn't happened yet. "You didn't have to do it like this," he said. "I did," I replied. He told me Denise was devastated, that she felt betrayed, that she was embarrassed. He said she'd only been trying to help Ryan, that she'd always taken responsibility for things no one else wanted to handle. She took responsibility for things that weren't hers, I said. He didn't argue that point. Instead, he shifted like he always did, moving toward peacekeeping. He asked if I'd consider letting it go, asked if I'd talk to her and smooth things over, asked if it was really worth tearing the family apart over a school program. That's when I realized how small the problem sounded when you stripped it of context. A school program, an instrument, a misunderstanding. So I put the context back in. She took my kid's instrument off him on stage, I said. In front of his teacher and classmates. She reassigned benefits that were never meant for her son. She did it quietly and confidently because she didn't think I'd stop her. My dad was quiet on the other end. I'm not smoothing that over, I continued. I'm stopping it. He said he understood. I didn't believe him, but I didn't need him to understand. I needed him to stop asking me to undo what I'd done. After that call, I made a decision I probably should have made earlier. I stopped explaining myself. To anyone. Caleb adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are resilient, but they're also observant. He didn't ask about Denise anymore. He didn't ask why Ryan stopped showing up at family events. He focused on his music. He practiced every afternoon, sometimes with frustration, sometimes with pride. He got better, not just technically, but in confidence. Like he trusted that what he worked for wouldn't be pulled out from under him again. One night, while he was practicing, he stopped and asked, "She can't take it again, right?" "No," I said. "She can't." He nodded, satisfied. That was all he needed. A month later, I got a letter from the Trust's legal department. It was formal and dry, the kind of letter that pretends emotions don't exist. It informed me that after further review, Denise's removal as trustee was permanent. It also informed me that a secondary account tied to the trust had been identified and restructured. That caught my attention. I called the number listed. The interim administrator explained it carefully. The trust had been established years earlier by my grandfather, with multiple sub-accounts designated for different educational purposes. One of them had been sitting untouched for years, restricted and invisible unless you knew where to look. Denise had known about the main account. She hadn't known about this one. This secondary account wasn't discretionary. It was locked to a specific beneficiary, Caleb. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, listening as the administrator explained what it meant. The funds weren't massive in the way people imagine windfalls, but they were substantial. Enough to cover years of music instruction. Enough for college courses down the line if he stayed with it. Enough that no one would ever have to handle things for us again. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat there for a long time. I didn't tell Caleb right away, not because it was a secret, but because I didn't want money to become the story. I wanted safety to be the story. Denise found out anyway. She showed up at my dad's house, furious, demanding answers. She accused him of siding with me. She accused the trust administrators of conspiring. She accused everyone but herself. My dad told me later that she cried, that she said she'd been punished for caring too much. I didn't go see her. I didn't call. I didn't engage. Ryan texted me once. A short message. He said he didn't know what his mom had done, that he was sorry if Caleb got hurt. I believed him. He was young, and he'd grown up in a system that rewarded him without explanation. I replied simply and told him I hoped he was doing okay. That was it. The final moment came quietly, the way most real endings do. At the end of the school year, the band held an awards night, certificates, speeches, cupcakes in the cafeteria. Caleb received a small plaque for Most Improved. When his name was called, he walked up confidently, took it from the director, and smiled at the audience. I clapped, hard, not caring who noticed. Afterward, as we walked to the car, he said, "I'm glad I stayed." "Me too," I said. Later that summer, I ran into Denise at a grocery store. We ended up in the same aisle, both reaching for coffee filters. She froze when she saw me. I nodded once, polite, neutral. She looked older somehow. Smaller. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then stopped. I took my filters and walked away. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. The thing about calm retaliation is that it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no shouting match, no final confrontation where everyone says exactly the right thing. It's paperwork, boundaries, decisions made without asking permission. Denise didn't lose everything. She lost access. She lost control. She lost the ability to reach into my son's life and rearrange it to suit her narrative. Caleb gained something better than money or music lessons. He gained proof. Proof that when someone crosses a line, it doesn't have to become a screaming match. It can become a line that simply stops being crossed. And I gained something too. The quiet certainty that protecting your child doesn't require you to be loud. It just requires you to be unmovable. Life didn't reset to normal after that. It shifted into something steadier, quieter, but not untouched. When you grow up in a family where control is disguised as care, silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means people are regrouping. For a while, things stayed calm. Caleb finished the school year strong. His band director recommended him for an advanced summer program, and this time, there was no paperwork drama, no mysterious mix-ups. I paid the enrollment fee myself without telling anyone. I didn't want favors. I didn't want leverage. I wanted clean lines. Caleb noticed the difference before I did. One night, after practice, he set his clarinet down and said, "It feels better now." "What does?" I asked. "Playing," he said. "Like I don't have to worry someone's going to stop me." That sentence stuck with me longer than it should have. Summer passed. Work stayed busy. I picked up extra hours, partly for the money, partly because staying occupied felt safer than sitting with thoughts I'd avoided for years. Denise didn't reach out again. Neither did most of that side of the family. Invitations stopped. Holidays became quieter. It was strange how quickly absence turned into routine. Then, in late August, my dad asked if we could talk. He came over on a Sunday afternoon, bringing a bag of takeout like an offering. He looked tired, not angry, not defensive, just worn down in a way that comes from years of smoothing things over and realizing the smoothing never actually fixes anything. We sat at the kitchen table. Caleb was in his room, practicing, the soft sound of scales drifting through the house. "I should have stopped her earlier," my dad said finally. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to rush him through something he was clearly still sorting out. "She's always been like that," he continued, taking charge, deciding what's best. And I let it slide because it was easier than fighting. I nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. That pattern wasn't news to me. "When she did it to you," he said, "I told myself it was between siblings. When she did it to Caleb." His voice trailed off. "That was different," I said. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was." He didn't ask me to forgive her. He didn't ask me to fix anything. He just wanted me to know he saw it now. That mattered more than I expected. Before he left, he said something else that caught me off guard. "She tried to borrow money from me," he said, "after the trust thing." I looked at him. "Did you?" "No," he said. "For the first time, I didn't." That was his version of change. Small, late, but real. A few weeks into the school year, Caleb came home with a permission slip for a regional music workshop. It was optional, competitive, and held at a college campus 2 hours away. He hovered in the kitchen while I read it, pretending not to care too much. "You want to do this?" I asked. He shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, I think so." "Then we'll do it," I said. He smiled, wide and unguarded, the kind of smile kids get when they trust the ground under their feet. The workshop weekend was exhausting and wonderful. I sat in a lecture hall with other parents while the kids rehearsed. I listened to instructors talk about breath control and discipline and patience. I watched Caleb blend into an ensemble, no longer the kid worried about being pulled aside. On the last day, there was a small performance. No drama, no interruptions, just music. Afterward, another parent struck up a conversation with me. She asked how long Caleb had been playing. I told her. She nodded, impressed. "He's lucky," she said, "to have support." I thought about that word. Lucky. On the drive home, Caleb fell asleep in the passenger seat, head tilted toward the window, clarinet case wedged carefully at his feet. I glanced at him at a red light and felt something settle fully for the first time since the recital. Denise never apologized. Not really. Months later, she sent a message that said she hoped time would heal misunderstandings. I didn't respond. Some things aren't misunderstandings. They're choices. Ryan stopped coming around entirely. I heard through my dad that he'd moved out of state for a job. I hoped it worked out for him. I meant that. None of this was his fault, even if he benefited from it for a while. The real shift came the following spring. Caleb auditioned for a youth orchestra. It was a long shot. He knew it. I knew it. He prepared anyway, practiced harder than I'd ever seen him practice. The night before the audition, he was nervous in a way that made his voice tight. "What if I mess up?" he asked. Then you mess up, I said, and nothing bad happens. He considered that. You promise? I promise, I said. When the acceptance email came 2 weeks later, he didn't scream. He just stared at the screen, then looked at me like he was checking to see if it was real. It's real, I said. He exhaled, long and shaky, then laughed. That night, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room and thought about how close he'd come to quitting, how easy it would have been for Denise to succeed if I'd hesitated, if I'd worried more about keeping the family comfortable than keeping my child safe. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grateful that the system had worked this time, grateful that I'd trusted my instincts, grateful that Caleb would grow up knowing that boundaries aren't punishments, they're protections. People talk about revenge like it's loud and messy, like it has to hurt everyone in the room to count. This didn't hurt everyone. It just stopped the harm. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending there is. By the time Caleb turned 13, the story had settled into something we didn't talk about anymore, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer defined our days. The clarinet case stayed by the door. Practice happened after homework. Band concerts came and went without incident. Life had a rhythm again. That's when Denise tried a different angle. She didn't come at me directly. She went through systems, paperwork, loopholes. The kinds of things she'd always trusted more than conversations. It started with a letter from the school district, addressed to me, stamped with urgency. I opened it standing at the counter, already tired from a 10-hour shift. It said a concern had been raised regarding Caleb's eligibility for advanced extracurricular programs based on residency verification. I read it twice. Our address hadn't changed. Caleb's enrollment was solid. There was no legitimate reason to question it. I called the number listed. The administrator sounded embarrassed before I even finished explaining. She told me an extended family member had submitted a claim stating Caleb didn't primarily reside with me and that I was misrepresenting household information to access benefits. Denise. I didn't react outwardly. I thanked the administrator and asked what documentation they needed. She told me. I sent it within the hour. Utility bills, school records, tax filings. Everything clean, everything boring. The claim was dismissed the next day. But that was when it clicked. Denise wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to exhaust me, to make involvement painful enough that I'd back off. It was escalation by attrition. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me careful. I called the interim trust administrator and asked a simple question. What protections were in place to prevent further interference? He explained the safeguards they'd already implemented, then paused and asked if there had been another incident. Yes, I said. And there will be more if we don't close the door completely. He agreed. Within a week, the trust issued formal cease and desist notices regarding unauthorized contact with institutions tied to Caleb's accounts or records. Denise was explicitly barred from representing herself as family liaison in any educational or financial context involving my son. It was dry language, legal, impersonal, and it worked. Denise called me after she received it. Her voice was different this time. Quieter. Not apologetic, but cautious. You didn't have to go this far, she said. I didn't, I replied. You did. She accused me of trying to erase her, of punishing her for caring, of teaching Caleb to fear his own family. I listened. I let her finish. Then I said, You don't get to touch his life anymore. That's not punishment. That's a boundary. She asked if there was any way back. I told her the truth. Not the way things were. She hung up without another word. After that, the attempts stopped. No more letters, no more calls to schools, no more quiet interference. The systems were locked, and she finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. Caleb noticed the shift before I said anything. They really can't mess with it now, can they? He asked one night while packing his bag for rehearsal. No, I said. They can't. He nodded, then added, Good. That was it. No follow-up. No need to revisit the past. Kids don't dwell the way adults do once they feel safe again. The real test came that winter, when the youth orchestra announced an out-of-state trip. 3 days, 2 nights, a real commitment. It required travel forms, emergency contacts, and proof of guardianship. I filled everything out carefully, triple-checked, submitted early. Nothing went wrong. No mysterious delays, no sudden questions, no disruptions. On the morning of departure, Caleb hugged me at the bus and said, "I'll text you when we get there." "Have fun," I said, and I meant it without reservation. While he was gone, my dad called again. This time, he didn't talk about Denise. He talked about himself, about regret, about how long he'd mistaken silence for peace. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he just acknowledged the cost. "I'm trying to do better," he said. "I know," I replied. When Caleb came home, he was exhausted and buzzing at the same time, talking over himself about rehearsals and friends and late-night card games in hotel rooms. He didn't mention Denise once. She no longer occupied space in his story. That was the final confirmation for me. The goal had never been to punish her. It had been to remove her influence before it shaped him. People like Denise don't change because they're confronted. They change because they lose access. Because the consequences stop being emotional and start being structural. That's what I'd done. Quietly, legally, permanently. One night, months later, Caleb asked me something unexpected. "Why didn't you yell at her?" he asked. I thought about it, about how easy it would have been, how satisfying it might have felt in the moment. "Because yelling wouldn't have protected you," I said. Fixing it did. He accepted that answer without debate. As he got older, the story became less about what was taken and more about what stayed, his confidence, his love of music, his trust that effort mattered. Denise faded into the background of our lives, not as a villain, but as a lesson, one we didn't need to repeat. Looking back, I understand something I didn't then. Calm isn't passive, it's controlled. And sometimes, the most decisive thing you can do is refuse to give someone the chaos they're counting on. That's how you protect a child. You don't fight louder. You make sure the fight can't reach them again. Time passed in a way that felt unfamiliar at first, not rushed, not tense, just steady. Caleb grew into himself, his shoulders squared out, his voice dropped. The clarinet stayed part of his life, but it stopped being the only thing that defined him. He joined jazz band, then marching band. He started talking about music theory like it was a language he'd always known and was just now remembering. I watched all of it from a small distance, careful not to hover. I'd learned something through all of this. Protecting your kid doesn't mean controlling their path. It means making sure no one else gets to. Denise stayed quiet for almost a year. Long enough that I thought, maybe, she'd finally understood. Maybe losing access had forced some self-reflection. I didn't trust that idea, but I allowed it to exist quietly in the background, the way you allow the idea that a storm might pass without flooding your basement again. Then the email came. It wasn't from Denise. It was from a law firm. The subject line included my name and the words, "Notice of Inquiry." That alone was enough to make my chest tighten. I opened it standing in the driveway after work, still in my boots, dust on my sleeves. The email was formal and vague. It stated that the firm represented Denise in a family-related financial clarification and requested documentation related to Caleb's trust accounts and educational funding. They framed it as routine, cooperative, almost friendly. I stared at the screen and felt something settle into place. She wasn't done. She'd just outsourced the pressure. I forwarded the email to the trust administrator and my attorney, the one I'd retained quietly after the residency claim incident. Just in case, I didn't respond directly. 2 days later, my attorney called me. "They don't have a case," she said. "But they're fishing." "For what?" I asked. "Anything that lets them reopen access, or argue you misused funds, or claim you influenced the original trust structure." I exhaled slowly. "Can they?" "No," she said, "but they can be annoying." That word didn't bother me. Annoyance is manageable. What bothered me was the intent. Denise wasn't trying to help Ryan anymore. She wasn't trying to correct a mistake. She was trying to reassert relevance, to remind me she was still watching. I authorized my attorney to respond on my behalf. Short, direct, declining the request. Reiterating the existing restrictions. Warning against further contact. The firm backed off quickly. That's when Denise tried something else. She went to Caleb. Not directly. Not in person. She sent him a message on social media. He showed it to me immediately, phone in hand, brows pulled together. "I didn't answer," he said. "I didn't know if I should." I read the message carefully. It was written like she was trying to sound gentle, casual. She said she missed him, that she hoped he was enjoying music, that families make mistakes, that she wished things could go back to how they were before all the stress. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just nostalgia, like the past was something that happened to her, not something she caused. "You don't have to respond," I told him. "I don't want to," he said, relieved. "Then don't," I said, "and you did the right thing telling me." "I have, Christ." I reported the message to my attorney and the trust administrator. Within a week, Denise received another formal notice, this one barring her from contacting Caleb directly or indirectly. That was the last attempt. After that, she disappeared for real. Caleb turned 14 that spring. He didn't ask to invite extended family to his birthday. He asked for a small gathering with friends and a trip to a jazz festival in Cincinnati. We did both. He laughed easily that weekend, loudly, the kind of laugh that fills space without fear of being shut down. At the festival, he played with kids from all over the state, different backgrounds, different families, same focus. No one there knew his history. No one could use it against him. I sat in the audience and watched him take a solo. It wasn't flashy, it was controlled, confident, his own. I realized then that the story I'd been living inside for years, the one about favoritism and control and family obligation, had finally stopped being the main narrative. It had become background context, something that informed choices, not something that dictated them. My dad came to that performance. He sat next to me, quiet, hands folded. He clapped hard when Caleb finished. Later, in the parking lot, he said, "You did right by him." I nodded. That was enough. Denise never showed up again. Not to events, not to holidays, not to anything that mattered. She faded into that category of relatives people refer to vaguely, without detail. The ones you don't explain because there's nothing left to explain. Years later, Caleb would ask questions about that night at the recital, not with pain, but with curiosity. Like he was studying a case, not reliving a wound. "She really thought she could just take it?" he asked once. "Yes," I said, "and you stopped her." "I did." He thought about that, then said, "Good." That's the thing about endings. They don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just show up quietly, in the form of a kid who doesn't doubt his place anymore. Denise thought power was something you exercised loudly, publicly, with witnesses. She was wrong. Real power is knowing when to step in, when to step back, and when to make sure someone never gets the chance to cross the line again. By the time Caleb started high school, Denise was no longer part of the equation. And neither was fear. That was the real victory. Not that she lost, but that she no longer mattered. High school changed the pace of everything. Caleb's days got longer, fuller. Early rehearsals, late practices, weekends that vanished into competitions and clinics. He started talking about colleges the way kids do when they're half dreaming, half testing the idea out loud. Music was still central, but it wasn't fragile anymore. It didn't feel like something that could be taken with one bad decision from an adult. That mattered more than I knew how to articulate. I stayed consistent. Same job. Same house, same routines. Stability isn't flashy, but it does something important over time. It teaches kids what normal feels like. Not perfect, just solid. Denise stayed gone. So long that when her name came up, it felt distant, like a reference to a relative in a story you stopped telling halfway through. I assumed that chapter was closed. I was wrong, but not in the way I expected. It happened during Caleb's sophomore year, right before midterms. I got a voicemail while I was at work, from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the message was tight, formal, and careful. "This is Officer Matthews with the County Sheriff's Office. Please return my call regarding a family-related inquiry." I listened to it twice. By the time I called back, my mind had already moved past panic into assessment. Law enforcement doesn't call for misunderstandings. They call when someone's escalated enough to pull them in. The officer answered on the second ring. He asked me to confirm my identity, then explained why he was calling. Denise had filed a report. She claimed I was financially exploiting Caleb. I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish. She alleged that I was withholding funds intended for his benefit, controlling access to trust money, and isolating him from family for personal gain. She framed it as concern, as protection, as something she was finally brave enough to report. The officer's tone stayed neutral. He told me they'd received documentation from her attorney. He told me they were required to follow up. I thanked him, asked what he needed from me. He paused, then said, "Honestly, just clarity." We set a time to meet at the station the following week. I didn't tell Caleb right away, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want him carrying anxiety that wasn't his to carry. This wasn't about him. It was about Denise refusing to let go. Before the meeting, I gathered everything: trust records, court filings, correspondence, the cease and desist notices, school documentation, financial statements showing funds used exactly as intended. Clean, documented, unemotional. My attorney came with me. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. The officer asked questions. My attorney answered some. I answered others. Everything Denise claimed unraveled under basic scrutiny. The trust wasn't under my control alone. Funds weren't missing. Caleb wasn't isolated. He was busy, healthy, engaged. At the end, the officer closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't rise to anything criminal," he said. "It doesn't even really rise to concern." He hesitated, then added, "It does suggest harassment." I nodded. That tracked. He told me they'd document the interaction, that Denise would be advised to stop filing unfounded reports, that continued attempts could result in consequences for her. I thanked him and left. That evening, I told Caleb. He listened quietly. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react the way I expected. "She called the cops on you?" he asked finally. "Yes," I said. "Because of me?" "Because she wants control," I said. "You're just the excuse." He thought about that for a moment, then shook his head. "That's messed up," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." He didn't ask if we were in trouble. He didn't ask what would happen next. He trusted that I'd handled it. Because I always had. A week later, Denise sent one final message. Not to me, to my dad. He forwarded it without comment. In it, she said she didn't recognize her own family anymore, that she felt shut out, that she was being punished for loving too much. That no one understood how hard it had been for her to carry responsibility all these years. She didn't mention Caleb. Not once. That told me everything. My dad didn't respond. For the first time in my life, he chose silence not as avoidance, but as refusal. After that, Denise stopped. No more reports, no more emails, no more attempts through third parties. The door wasn't just closed anymore, it was sealed. Caleb finished that school year strong. He got a leadership position in band. He started mentoring younger students. I watched him explain fingerings to a nervous sixth grader one afternoon and felt something in my chest ease permanently. He'd become someone who stayed. That summer, he asked if we could visit colleges, just to look. We drove to a few campuses, walked through music buildings, sat in on rehearsals. He asked smart questions, thought out loud, imagined himself there without hesitation. On the drive home from one visit, he said, "I'm glad you didn't let her mess this up." "I didn't," I said. "No," he corrected gently. "You stopped her." That distinction mattered. Denise believed that family meant access, that love meant entitlement, that authority could be inherited and exercised without consent. She was wrong. Family is responsibility without control. Love is protection without possession. And authority ends the moment it's used to harm. Caleb didn't need to learn that lesson the hard way. He learned it by watching someone draw a line and hold it. That was the end of it. Not with an apology, not with reconciliation, just with distance, clarity, and a future that stayed intact. And that was enough. After Denise's report went nowhere, something in the air finally changed. Not relief exactly, more like gravity easing. The constant sense that I needed to stay alert, one step ahead, started to fade. I didn't stop being careful, but I stopped expecting the next hit to come out of nowhere. Caleb noticed before I did. "You're not as tense anymore," he said one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. He was taller than me now, reaching shelves without asking. His voice had settled into something deeper, steadier. "I guess I'm not," I said. He nodded like that made sense, and went back to drying dishes. That was the thing about him. He didn't need big explanations. He paid attention. He drew his own conclusions. Junior year moved fast. AP classes, late nights, band competitions that required hotel rooms and schedules taped to the fridge. I filled out permission slips without anxiety. Emergency contacts stayed unchanged. No mysterious calls followed. Everything just worked. One afternoon, near the end of the year, Caleb came home with an envelope from the guidance office. He dropped it on the counter without comment. "What's that?" I asked. "Scholarship info," he said. "They think I should apply for a couple." I picked it up, flipped through the papers. One of the programs was tied to the same regional arts foundation that had funded some of his early workshops. I felt a flicker of something, not fear, exactly, but awareness. "Any concerns?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "Just paperwork." We filled it out together over the next few weeks. Essays, recommendations, financial disclosures, everything transparent, everything clean. When the acceptance letter came that summer, it felt surreal. Partial funding, renewable, not enough to change everything, but enough to matter. Enough to say someone outside our family saw his effort and wanted to invest in it. Caleb read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. "I earned this," he said, not as a question. "Yes," I said, "you did." That fall, Denise resurfaced in the least dramatic way possible. A mutual acquaintance mentioned her name in passing at a community event, said she'd moved closer to Ryan, that she'd been having a hard time, that she talked a lot about being misunderstood. I listened politely. I didn't ask questions. Her life was no longer relevant to mine. Later that night, I thought about how much energy I'd spent over the years trying to anticipate her reactions, how much of my decision-making had been shaped by avoiding her disapproval. It felt strange, realizing I no longer did that her opinion had finally lost weight. Caleb applied to college's senior year. Some close, some far, music programs, general studies. He kept his options open. I supported all of them. When acceptance letters started arriving, he spread them out on the living room floor like a map of possible futures. He didn't rush. He compared programs, costs, environments. He chose with intention. He picked a state university with a strong music department and a solid reputation, not flashy, not elite, just right. On move-in day, I helped him carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs. We made his bed. We argued lightly about where to put the desk. He hung his concert attire carefully in the closet. When it was time to leave, he hugged me longer than usual. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just, thanks." "For what?" "For not letting things get weird," he said. "For handling it." I nodded. That was enough. The first semester passed smoothly. He called once a week, texted more often, talked about classes and ensembles and people I hadn't met. He sounded happy, busy, engaged. One night, halfway through the spring semester, he called later than usual. "Hey," he said. Something happened. My chest tightened out of habit, but his tone wasn't panicked, just thoughtful. "Okay," I said. "What's up?" "Someone in my studio was talking about family stuff," he said, "about how their parents control their money and their schedule and everything, and they asked me how I deal with it." "And?" I asked. "I told them I don't," he said. "Because I don't have to." "And was?" I smiled into the phone. "That sounds right," I said. He paused, then added, "I think watching you deal with Denise taught me something." "What's that?" "That calm doesn't mean weak," he said. "It means you already know what you're doing." I let that sit. A few months later, my dad passed away quietly in his sleep. Heart attack, quick, unexpected. The funeral was small. Denise was there. We didn't speak. We stood on opposite sides of the room like strangers who shared a last name and nothing else. She looked at me once, long enough to make it clear she recognized the distance. I didn't look away. I didn't step closer either. After the service, I drove home alone. The house felt quieter than it ever had. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about how much had changed, how many cycles had ended without fanfare. Caleb called that night. We talked about his grandfather, about memories, about music, about nothing. We didn't talk about Denise. There was nothing left to say. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see while I was in it. The real turning point wasn't the recital. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't even the legal boundaries. It was the moment I stopped explaining myself. That's when everything shifted. Denise didn't lose because she was confronted. She lost because she was outgrown. And Caleb didn't win because someone gave him something. He won because no one was allowed to take it away again. That's how it ended. Not with reconciliation. With clarity. Life after Caleb left for college was quieter in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not lonely, just different. The house adjusted slowly, like it was learning a new shape. I still woke up early, still made coffee out of habit, still glanced down the hallway at his closed door before remembering it stayed that way now. We talked often, enough that I never wondered how he was doing. He called when he had good news, and when he was tired, and when he needed to hear a familiar voice that didn't want anything from him. I listened more than I talked. That felt right. About halfway through his sophomore year, something unexpected happened. Denise reached out again. Not to me, to Caleb. He told me about it the next day, casually, like it was already handled. She emailed me, he said. From a new address. What did she say? I asked. She said she was proud of me, he replied. Said she'd been following my performances online. Said she hoped I knew how talented I was. There it was. The version of affection that didn't require accountability. What did you do? I asked. I didn't answer, he said. I forwarded it to you and my advisor, like we talked about. I felt something ease that I hadn't realized was still tight. Good, I said. You don't owe her access. I know, he replied. I just wanted you to know. Minuses abound. That was the difference. He didn't need permission. He chose transparency. A week later, my attorney emailed to let me know Denise had been formally warned again, that continued attempts to contact Caleb could result in legal consequences. It was procedural, routine, boring. That's how you know something's truly over. When the response doesn't feel personal anymore, Caleb thrived after that. He took on more leadership roles. He started composing. He talked about internships and graduate school. Music was no longer something he clung to for safety. It was something he expanded into. One afternoon during his junior year, he came home for a long weekend. We sat on the back porch, drinking iced tea, watching the light shift across the yard. You ever regret how things went? He asked suddenly. With Denise? I clarified. Yeah, I thought about it honestly. About the years of tension, the paperwork, the conversations that never happened. No, I said. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. He nodded. That's how I feel too. That statement meant more to me than any apology ever could have. The final twist came quietly, without drama. During Caleb's senior year, the trust administrator reached out to schedule a routine review. Everything was in order. Investments were steady, accounts clean. At the end of the call, he mentioned something almost as an aside. Your aunt petitioned again, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. For what? To be reinstated in any capacity, he replied. We denied it. Why now? I asked. She cited family reconciliation, he said, and upcoming life changes. That phrase stuck with me. A month later, I heard through a distant relative that Denise was in financial trouble. Medical bills, poor planning, Ryan struggling again. The safety net she'd relied on for years was gone. I felt a flicker of sympathy, not enough to act on. Caleb found out around the same time. He brought it up carefully, like he was checking the ground before stepping. She's not doing great, he said. I know, I replied. He waited. I let him. I don't feel guilty, he said finally. Is that bad? No, I said. It's honest. He exhaled. Okay, that was it. No debate, no moral wrestling. He understood something I'd taken decades to learn. You can acknowledge someone's hardship without inviting them back into your life. Caleb graduated that spring. We sat through the ceremony together. I watched him walk across the stage and felt a familiar tightening in my chest, not fear, pride. Afterward, we took pictures. He hugged me, sweaty and smiling, diploma in hand. I couldn't have done this if you hadn't stopped her, he said quietly. You did this, I corrected. I just kept the door closed. He smiled at that. Denise didn't attend. She wasn't invited. She didn't ask. A few weeks later, the trust administrator called one last time. As of today, he said, the trust is fully transitioned to Caleb's control. I hung up and sat there for a long moment, letting it land. That was the end of my role as gatekeeper. When I told Caleb, he laughed. Guess it's official, he said. It is, I agreed. We celebrated with takeout and a quiet evening. No speeches. No revisiting the past. Just a sense of completion. Denise never reached out again. Years later, when people ask me how I handled a toxic family member, I don't tell them about confrontation or ultimatums. I tell them about paperwork, boundaries, patience. I tell them that protecting your child doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks boring, and that's how you know it worked. By the time the trust fully transferred to Caleb, my job was done in a way that felt both relieving and unsettling. For years, I'd been the barrier, the filter, the person standing between him and someone who believed love meant leverage. Letting go of that role meant trusting that everything we'd built would hold without me guarding every edge. It did. Caleb moved cities for his first job after graduation, not far enough to feel unreachable, but far enough to feel independent. He found a small apartment near a music venue that paid him to play 3 nights a week. He took contract work, teaching lessons in the afternoons. He sounded tired on the phone sometimes, but it was the good kind of tired, the earned kind. I didn't interfere. I didn't manage. I didn't check behind him. I'd learned that protection has an expiration date. At some point, it turns into control if you're not careful. We talked about normal things. Work, bills, bad roommates, music that excited him, music that bored him. He asked for advice when he wanted it. He ignored it when he didn't. That felt healthy. Denise stayed silent. Years passed, long enough that when her name came up, it felt like referencing an old workplace you barely remember. Something that once mattered a lot, now reduced to a footnote. Then, one winter afternoon, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in a long time. Ryan. I hesitated before answering, not out of fear, out of caution. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded older, thinner. "Hey," I replied. He didn't waste time. He told me Denise's health had declined, chronic issues, complications, nothing dramatic, just enough to make life harder than it already was. He said she'd asked about Caleb. I listened. I didn't interrupt. "She knows she messed up," he said. "She says she does." I didn't respond right away. Silence can be an answer without being cruel. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," Ryan added quickly. "I just thought you should know." "I appreciate you telling me," I said. And I meant it. After the call, I sat there for a long time, thinking about what accountability looks like when there's no audience. Denise hadn't apologized to Caleb. She hadn't taken responsibility publicly. She hadn't tried to make amends in any meaningful way. Time had passed, but time doesn't absolve anything on its own. I called Caleb that evening and told him about the conversation. I kept it factual, neutral. He was quiet for a moment. "She wants to talk?" he asked. "She asked about you," I said. "She didn't ask me to arrange anything." He considered that. "I don't think I want to reopen that," he said. "Not right now." "That's okay," I replied, "and it's your call." "I know," he said. "Thanks for not pushing." I didn't push. That was the point. A month later, Denise passed away. Ryan called again. His voice was unsteady this time. He told me when the service would be. He didn't ask if I was coming. "I'm sorry," I said. And I was, not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd never been able to keep. I told Caleb. He didn't react much, just nodded slowly. "I don't feel sad," he said. "I feel finished." "That's okay," I said. "You don't owe grief." He didn't attend the service. Neither did I. Later, Ryan reached out one last time. He said Denise had left notes, not letters, notes. In one of them, she mentioned Caleb, said she hoped he'd understand someday, that she'd only wanted the best for everyone. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to. Intent doesn't erase impact, and understanding doesn't require reconciliation. Life moved forward the way it always does, quietly, without ceremony. Caleb kept building his career. He made mistakes, learned from them. He struggled sometimes, financially, creatively. He never once asked Denise for help. He never once felt entitled to anything that wasn't earned. That mattered more than any trust fund ever could. One evening, years after the recital, we sat together at a small show where he was performing. I watched him on stage, confident, relaxed, in control of his space. No one could take that from him now. After the set, he came over and sat beside me, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You know," he said, "I don't think about her anymore." "I know," I said. "But I do think about what you did," he continued, "how you handled it." I didn't say anything. I let him finish. It taught me how to deal with people who overstep, he said. I don't fight them. I don't explain myself. I just decide what access they get. I smiled. That was the lesson. The story everyone expects in situations like this is reconciliation, tears, forgiveness, a final conversation that makes everything neat. That's not what happened. What happened was distance, boundaries, a child growing into an adult without carrying someone else's dysfunction forward. That's the ending people don't talk about, because it's not flashy, but it's real, and it lasts. The story doesn't end with a confrontation. It never really did. It ends the way most real stories end, quietly, after everyone has stopped keeping score. Years passed. Caleb built a life that didn't orbit trauma or resistance. He worked, he played, he taught, he paid rent, he argued with sound engineers and laughed about it later. Music wasn't a refuge anymore. It was just part of who he was. I stayed where I was. Same house, same job, though my back complained more than it used to. I learned how to be present without hovering, how to support without steering, how to trust that the foundation we'd built could carry weight without constant reinforcement. People would ask about family sometimes, casual questions. Do you have siblings? Is your son close with his relatives? I answered simply, we're small. We're close where it counts. No one ever pushed past that. Most people don't actually want the full story. They just want reassurance that things are fine. And they were. Once, years after everything had settled, Caleb and I were driving back from a show. It was late. The highway was mostly empty. He was quiet in that thoughtful way that usually meant something was coming. Do you ever think about how different things could have gone? He asked. Yes, I said. Like if you hadn't stepped in, he continued. If you'd tried to keep the peace instead. I didn't answer right away. The road hummed under the tires. The dash lights glowed steady and calm. I think about it sometimes, I said, but not with regret. He nodded. Me neither. That was the final confirmation. Not that I'd done the right thing, but that the right thing had held up over time. Denise never became a monster in this story. She didn't need to. She was ordinary in the way harm often is, confident, certain, convinced she knew best, convinced her intentions outweighed the consequences. I don't hate her. I don't talk about her. I don't carry her forward. I carry what I learned. That protecting your child doesn't require permission. That family isn't a title, it's behavior. That calm is not the absence of action, it's action without chaos. The night of the recital, when she took the clarinet from my son's hands, she thought she was correcting a mistake. She thought she was reminding him of his place. What she actually did was reveal herself. And once someone shows you exactly who they are, the most powerful thing you can do is believe them and respond accordingly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't humiliate her back. I didn't demand apologies that would never come. I used the systems she relied on. I closed doors she assumed were permanent. I taught my child, without a lecture, that safety doesn't come from compliance. It comes from boundaries that don't move. That lesson stayed with him longer than any resentment ever could. If there's a moral to this, it isn't dramatic. It's practical. If someone hurts your child and calls it love, you don't argue. You act. You document. You protect. And then you move on without looking back. That's not revenge. That's responsibility. And it's enough.